Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of A God Shift. I'm your host, Shayna Rattler. I'm so glad that you're here today because we have a great conversation in store. But before we get started, I need you to do me a favor. Wherever it is that you're listening to this episode, I just want you to take a screenshot. With that screenshot, I want you to post it on your social media, tag us here at A God Shift, and then I just want to hear your biggest aha moment or your biggest takeaway from this episode. And the reason why I do that is not because I'm so concerned about number of downloads and number of listeners, but I do know that there's a lot of believers out there that really want to do their part to uphold Christian values, and everybody just doesn't know where to start. And so the more times these episodes are shared, the more people that can learn the strategies and the tips and the tools that are shared on these episodes. So I appreciate you in advance for being willing to share. I'm going to read my guest bio
Hmm.
and then we're going to get started. My guest today is the founder of sexchangeregret.com and a faculty member of the Influence Network. He is considered one of the world's foremost authorities on the transgender phenomenon, as he has authored 7 books on the subject, personally experienced sex change regret, and travels extensively to share his unique perspective and expertise. His books include Paper Genders, Pulling the Mask Off the Transgender Phenomenon, and Trans Life Survivors. I want to welcome to the show Walt Heyer.
Hey, Shania, thank you for having me on. It's exciting. I'm glad to be on.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have you here. So, this is, one of the deeper conversations, one of the ones that people probably, are dying to hear because they want to understand it more. When we look at what's going on in our homes and our schools, our community, our world at large, we see a lot of things that we didn't see at one time in our lives. We see a lot of things that are really contrary to what the Word of God says, and things that relate to our gender are one of those things that seems to be not only gaining in popularity, but also gaining in support as well. And so I want to just start, Walt, by you helping us understand what is the leading cause of gender confusion and gender distress.
Yeah. Actually, it starts sometime during childhood. We call it adverse childhood experiences. Actually, the technical term is ACEs, and children. I think we, as parents, think our children are resilient, that they can take things and it doesn't bother them. The fact of the matter is that some things turn out to be traumatizing to children that we look at as parents and think is kind of benign. And some of those things that are traumatizing to children is actually moving, relocating from a place where they lived before, a father dying, a mother being an alcoholic. You can go down the list, incarceration. I've had children who had cancer at a young age, and the parents thought that wasn't traumatizing at 5 years old to have cancer and have a leg removed. So
Yeah.
I think what's really important for this conversation today is for people to get really keen about understanding what traumatizes children, because those traumas cause people, listen to this, to not want to be who they are. The fact of the matter is, it's not even about gender. It's
Wow.
about not wanting to be who they are because of something that happened to them. And I can tell you that I ask everybody when they write me and they said, they want help. I say, well, what caused you to not like who you are? Because I said, it's not about gender. And so it goes back to kind of understanding, and they get to articulate what happened. One young man told me that he was sexually abused during a summer camp. His diving coach did it. As another one, a neighbor sexually abused him, but they don't tell their parents. So I
Right.
think parents need to be keen about when they see their kids becoming somewhat depressed, and dig in and find out, why are they depressed? What's causing them to change the way they feel? Also, the computer isn't the enemy in the home for many parents, because the kids are going online, they're seeing pornography, they're seeing transgender websites, and these things are harmful, they're destructive, and they don't have God's values any place in them. So if you're a parent who cares about your child learning about God, the first thing we need to tell our kids is the answer to gender's in Genesis. Everything about who we are is in Genesis. And
Yeah.
there's man and woman. There isn't. So when people start telling us, you can change and there's 50 different genders, first thing as a parent, that's nonsense. There's only
Yeah.
two. And we need to continue to fight back on that.
I'm glad that you said what you said because my mind immediately wanted to play devil's advocate when you were saying that the leading cause was, something traumatic that had happened to them. And in my mind, while you were saying that before you got to the end, which is why I'm glad I don't interrupt people or do the best that I can, is because my mind immediately went to, now wait a minute, Walt. There's a lot of people that are traumatized that don't change their gender. But I love that you pinpointed the fact that what this is really about is a form of escapism. Now, that's not what you said, but it's really about them not wanting to be who they were, hoping to disconnect from what it is that they've experienced. And if they become someone different, and it just ends up translating into some people, if they can come something different, then it'll kind of help numb that pain. And I liken it to everybody reacts a different way to trauma.
Yes.
Some people turn to drugs and alcohol, some people turn to promiscuity, some people have to, turn to like, I want to be a little more drastic. I want to change this so much that I'm going to go all the way away from. I believe,
Yep.
especially if it was a form of sexual trauma. Now, you
Yep.
didn't say this, but is it safe for me to assume that if a female was, or if a male, if a female was assaulted by a male, is there something that goes on in their head that says, well, if I become a male, then I eliminate that ever happening to me again? Like, what's the thought process, if you can touch on that at all?
That is beautiful because that's exactly what happens. You
Mm,
see, they want to repel anyone who might abuse them again. And by identifying as a man, they become what they feel like repugnant to being harmed by a man again, right? I've
wow.
actually had young boys who were sexually abused say they wanted to cut off their genitalia because they never wanted to be touched there again.
Wow.
Not because they wanted to be transgender, although that was the outcome.
Yeah.
It becomes a defense mechanism against being abused. And
Wow.
so that, yeah, and you point out something really good. Yeah, a lot of people don't, identify as trans, even though they had serious trauma. There's a difference in the word is resilience.
Mm,
If your child has less resilience, then he's more apt to follow this trail. And some kids actually are so strong in their resilience, they'll actually excel after being traumatized. They battle through it much better. But what we're dealing with is the people who are more vulnerable and have less resilience in battling things. So things that happen to, like myself, as an example, I was physically abused by my mother, physically abused by my father, cross-dressed by my grandmother, and sexually abused by my uncle. My resilience was gone.
wow.
I had nothing left.
When you say, Walt, cross-dressed by your grandmother, do you mean that your grandmother dressed you as a girl?
Absolutely.
And why did she do that, if you have
Good
any
question.
understanding?
She found it. She was a dressmaker, and I was a 4-year-old boy. And grandma always had a half bottle of whiskey in her pocket. She drank a bit.
She had a half a pint of whiskey and a half a yard of material, and she wanted you to try on the dresses and see how they looked. Is that how this
She
goes?
made me a purple chiffon dress. And so there's a documentary in Brazil. It's called The Purple Dress that I made for the Brazilian audience. And so um, when we cross dress a child, and I want parents to kind of take a step back and listen to this, that is emotional and psychological child abuse. So, unfortunately, we're in a time when we think it's fun and benign and all that stuff to cross-dress our kids, let them identify as a different gender. No, it's very harmful. This is destructive to the psyche. Keep in mind, the brain is not fully developed until sometime between 25 and 30 years old. And kids who are cross-dressed do not understand one big word: consequences.
Hmm.
What's the consequences?
Right.
So we've talked about 3 words here: trauma, resilience, and consequences. And we need to start sort of using those as parents to see and begin to understand what's going to happen to kids who are harmed early in life.
So help me understand something. Um, I have often said, on one hand, I realize that some of this is demonic.
Mhm.
Some of this is a spiritual attack that we're under because the enemy is the author of confusion. And the enemy loves to attack our identity and be like, well, did God really say?
Mhm.
But I've often said, outside of that, because I don't think that that's everyone's story, I've
Right.
often said something has got to be wrong psychologically. And I find it ironic that I'm told, now I could be wrong, you're the expert. I'm told that prior to transitioning, that you have to go through psychological testing to make sure that you're sound to make these decisions. So I what's always been missing for me is in my mind, in my limited understanding of what could potentially be going on, I'm thinking something has got to be wrong psychologically. And then when I'm told that they do psychological testing, I'm like, well, what exactly are they testing for? Because in my mind, if they were really testing them adequately, hopefully they would realize that something is wrong here and not give them permission to do it. And maybe that's not how it works, but these are the bits and pieces of conversations that or information that I've been given. Can you talk about that piece of it at all?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's the greatest piece of all. They don't do any testing. They go to a psychologist, and the child or the psychologist says, well, you have gender dysphoria. That's the end of the game. Gender dysphoria is the key that unlocks the door to hormones and surgery. And the fact of the matter is that the only way you can get hormones and surgery is be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Now, what is dysphoria? It means you're unhappy. It's the opposite of euphoria. It's not even a diagnosis. It's actually a symptom. And
Yeah.
if we understand it's a symptom of something deeper, then we can start looking for what's deeper. If in fact what you were saying is true, and they did a good what we call differential diagnosis,
Yeah.
no one would have the surgery because they would all fail to qualify as an effective, good candidate for hormones and surgery because there's always something underlying. And those underlying issues are body dysmorphia, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, PTSD, obsessive compulsive disorder, social adjustment disorders. There's so many of these disorders and that's what I have worked with thousands of people who have written me to my website, Sex Change Regret, for almost 14 years. And when I write them back and say, tell me what it is that caused you to not like who you are, we begin to open up a conversation and I begin to discover what it was that caused this. Sometimes it's the internet. Some kids weren't abused. Some kids weren't traumatized. They did it because their friends did it. They wanted to join a group. And so that's why we have 5 girls going to Planned Parenthood to get hormones together to identify as a guy, not because they had gender dysphoria, although that's the words they use to get the hormones. They go in and say, I have gender dysphoria. And there's no psychologist there. They just hand them the hormones. And so there is no gatekeeper. In fact, that's the word they use. If in fact we were to have these diagnoses, which are significantly important, then they would say that we are keeping people from transitioning and that we're the ones causing the harm. I just get them after they've gone through the surgery and need help to identify what caused them to do it. So they don't do any, if they do good therapy, then they will not be approved for hormones and surgery.
So dysphoria is a symptom of something that deeper that is going on. So you have an individual that is already experiencing one or more of the things that you just described that is really the root cause of this. We allow them to reassign their sex to the opposite gender. But I'm also understanding, and I don't know what all of them are. I want you to talk about this. The negative consequences, like the suicide rate is higher. And so you take someone who's already having issues that need to be dealt with, and you allow them to do something to themselves that either, correct me if I'm wrong, either worsens what the original root cause was or adds to it. What are some of the negative consequences that happen? Because, people need to hear like, hey, you think the solution to whatever it is that you're experiencing is just to decide on your own to be something else. But what is the downside of that you've seen?
Well, Sweden has done the best studies on it, so I'm not going to use any of my personal experience with that, except Sweden says they track everybody in that country. And they said after undergoing hormones and surgery, people are 19 times more likely to die by suicide. That is their study. I can tell you from my own personal experience, within a month after having hormones and surgery, I attempted suicide. Many people attempt suicide. And so I'll go with the 19 times. That should be sufficient for parents and others to say, this is not good. Here's the other thing that's so interesting. I challenged my surgeon and my therapist. My therapist actually wrote the standards of care, the WPATH standards of care, Dr. Paul Walker. And I challenged them to, when I wanted to restore my birth record, which had been changed to Laura Jensen female, I wanted to get it back to Walt Heyer. I asked them to go to court and prove to the court that you could actually change somebody's gender with hormones and surgery. And they wrote a document, is Superior Court of California, San Mateo, which said you cannot change anybody's gender with hormones and surgery. So the fact of the matter is, all we're doing is it would be like somebody in a movie just playing a role. It's a masquerade. There is no biological change that occurs. It's all cosmetic surgery. And the hormones are dangerous. We know that blood clotting is one of the things that happens, heart attacks. For the females who take testosterone, they really gain a lot of weight in many cases. They get beards that they wish they didn't have when they regret it. That takes years for them. Their voice will never come back. If it just goes deep and that's the end of it, you can't take estrogen and get your voice back. It actually destroys women. And the worst of it is I've seen them from 6 months after taking hormones to 30 years after, and all of them, it's devastating to them. So we're actually causing people more harm. The word that I use is this whole transgender movement devalues who they are by telling them that they can change. Wow. It dehumanizes them by giving them hormones and interrupting their whole endocrine system. And then they're destroyed and unable to produce sperm if they're a boy, or produce a girl if they're a girl. They can't give birth. So this is sort of abortion 2.0. We're not reproducing. This is a group of people who will not reproduce children. That is a huge thing that no one talks about.
Well, Walt, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about maybe what some of the things are that we can do in order to begin to see a stop to this egregious act that is going on. We'll be right back.
God is commissioning women leaders to uphold Christian values and change the course of history for his glory, and to mobilize other women to blaze the same trail. Want to know what type of kingdom leader you are and learn specific strategies to impact change based on your type? Find out by going to kingdomtrailblazerquiz.com right now.
Welcome back. So before the break, we started talking about individuals that are confused or distressed about their gender, and some are going as far as to have surgery to change it, and like what's causing it and what happens after they do it. And so, Walt, I would love to start to shift the conversation to some of the solutions. So can you tell us about how you became an advocate for those that actually have regret after the reassignment surgery?
Yeah, because I went through it and lived it for 8 years and discovered that it's a fraud.
How old were you when you had the first surgery, and then how old were you when you had
got my life back?
I was going to say, I don't even know what it's called. If it's reassigned, do you de-assign? I don't even know what I call it.
But I use a biblical term. I got my life back, the one that the Lord gave me during conception. And so, yeah, when I was 42, and I came back to the Lord Jesus Christ when I was 50, And so from that point on, I wanted to do everything I could to prevent people. Once I learned that you can't change your gender, nobody talks about that. That's sort of like, you shouldn't say that. Well, sorry, you can't change your gender. That's innate and fixed at conception. If we just look at conception and realize you can't unwind that. And so and then I started the website Sex Change Regret. I wrote my first book in 2006. I've continued to write books. I've got a book coming out. I'm a senior fellow with Family Research Council in DC. We're writing a book. It's called God's Design of Man and Woman. It's going to be available probably by October. But probably one of the most important things, I've done over 20 documentary films I've been in myself. I'm not alone in those documentaries, other people were in them, but been involved in 20 plus documentary films. I've written 7 books. I've written numerous articles, including in USA Today, and I still see the horrors of this thing happening. So what I've just done recently, within the last 2 weeks, I just finished with Ascend Pictures and Sean Sorgosi writing the script for a full-length feature film about this issue. And so we've started this called, what I want people to go to, I'm trying to raise up 100,000 people to the website, themoviewhoami.com, themoviewhoami.com. We need 100,000 good people to do a movie, because we know that people learn from books. We know that people learn from what we're doing today. And they learned from me going to conferences, which I'll be in one later this week. But movies are powerful. So I'm investing everything that I've got in doing this movie. And I want 100,000 people, if they give $1 or $5, whatever they can give, we need your money to make this movie. We're going to pitch it to Angel Studios and try to get it going. It's going to be about redemption and restoration through Christ after living a life as transgender. So this is kind of the big thing in terms of where we're going from here, is to get this movie launched. And I'm 83 years old. I'll be, within about 6 months, I'll be 84. I need the movie out there so I can see it pretty quick, because, the sand is kind of running out of that hourglass. So, and I've worked with Lucas Miles at Influence Network. I'm on staff there, one of the faculty. So we're helping people at Influence Network who've gone through it. The movie is to prevent people from going through it. I mean, the whole idea is to shut down ever having anybody who regrets it, right? I mean, that's really the optimum goal, is not to spend our time helping people because they regret it. It's to prevent them from going through it so they can live out their life as God intended them to live.
Absolutely. So at the time of this recording, it is spring of 2024. And the current administration in the White House has not only put policies in place that support children being able to do this. There's states that, parents can even go to jail if they stop their their children from trying to do this. A few weeks ago was Easter or Resurrection Sunday, and President Biden announced that was like Transgender Visibility Day. Why is our government so hell-bent on supporting this phenomenon?
Yeah, there's a lot of huge money behind that machine, the Democratic machine. Their votes, we got to remember, their votes, all of their votes come from these ideologies. There isn't, they pitch to them that we'll cradle to grave you, we'll give you hormones for free, we'll give you a life for free, everything is going to be free. And so the government is, playing big brother to these ideologies. And so that's why the movie is important. If the movie comes out, we can teach people that you don't need to go through this. And we can begin to win this whole battle for the Lord Jesus Christ and get people to realize that they're being lied to. There isn't anybody changing genders, and it's causing harm and increasing the rate of suicide by 19 times.
I do believe that this movie is going to happen. I'm going to do my part. I'm going to post on my social media to my 10s, 13s, thousands followers or whatever I have, and get them to give money as well. I do believe that this movie will happen. But I also, as we're beginning to wrap up, I just want to know, like, what do you recommend? So if we know someone that is battling gender dysphoria, or if we know someone who has gone as far as, having the surgery and they're regretting it, what are some things that we can do? Obviously, we can put our money behind it, which we should, but what are some of the other things that we can do if we have the opportunity to be in personal contact with someone who's experiencing this?
Get 2 books into their hands, Paper Genders and Trans Life Survivors, not into the hands of the individual who's struggling, but get the book into the hands of the people who are faced with these issues. If you give the book to somebody who's struggling, it will only drive them deeper in their issues. And we want to educate people. Those 2 books will educate people of what happens, what they're saying, what they're thinking. And you can see the history. Paper Genders gives the history about how we got to this point, and Trans Life Survivors is 30 stories written. These are emails that came to me from people who are struggling. So you get to see in their own words what they're saying about regret.
Wow. Well, Walt, you are a wealth of knowledge. I wish we could go all day, but how can our listeners follow you on social media? What's your social media handle?
Well, I don't have social media. I don't. Everything I do is through the website, theheyerinstitute.com, and the movie Who Am I? And right now, the primary lead for us to reach this population is the movie Who Am I? So we will be sending out, in a monthly report, hopefully, to all the people who get on there and give us their emails at themoviewhoami.com. So that's really the best way to follow me
Perfect.
and know what I'm doing.
Perfect. I'm going to make sure that the links to both of those websites are in the show notes. Everyone, share this episode. I'm sure you can, whether you're watching this or if you're just listening to the audio, you notice that I'm not my normal bubbly self. This really saddens me. I've been personally, not myself personally, but a family member that has been affected by this phenomenon. And just, it's always really saddened me, but the more I learn about it, the more that it not just saddens me, but provokes me to, want to do something about it. And so share this episode far and wide. If you've never shared any other episode, this is the one that you need to share. So Walt, thank you so much for being here today. Everyone, I pray that this episode has blessed you like it has me, and that you will go back and listen to previous and future episodes as well. Everyone, have a great day.
Thank you very much.